Hello everyone. I'm going to do a talk on Hypatia, the Alexandrian Neo-Platonist. I'm going to try and do a few talks on some famous, or not so famous, female philosophers, poets, and mystics. That's the one. It's going to be a share screen. So I'm going to put the share screen on. There we go. It seems a bit clumsy doing that, but there's probably a better way of doing it. So Hypatia, the Neo-Platonist. So Hypatia is one of my favourite females in history, and she was so cruelly treated by the Christians in the end, or the Christian church, during the early centuries after the death of Jesus. She's generally regarded as the last Neoplatonist, and her story, though sad in many ways, is also replete with courage and hope. So to begin our tale, we need to go right back to the 4th century AD, and to a time when a just and good Roman emperor named Julian reigned. He was a Neoplatonist and a pupil of Odysseus, who himself had been taught by the great initiate Iamblichus. So after a long period of intolerant Christian rule by Constantine and his sons, Julian finally brought a period of relative peace. He was the nephew of Constantine and the complete opposite to his uncle, who was a despot. He gave free rights to all people, regardless of their beliefs, and he invited all pagan teachers driven out of Alexandria by Constantine to return. He even tried to get the various arguing Christian factions to reconcile their differences. But despite his kindness and tolerance, he has gone down in Christian history as Julian the Apostate. Of course, the Christian church at the time regarded him as a danger and a menace. In fact, when he was eventually killed in battle by the soldiers of the Persian king Sapor, the Catholic Church wrote that the greatest enemy of Christianity, after only 18 months' reign, had met his death through divine intervention. Yet, as he lay dying, Julian uttered these words which ring through time and into all our hearts, at least those that are lit by the beauty of the sacrifice made for us by those who know the value of true spirituality. He said, "I have learned from philosophy how much more excellent the soul is than the body, that the separation of the nobler substance should be the subject of joy rather than of affliction. And I affirm with confidence that the emanation of the divine power has been preserved in my hands pure and immaculate. Detesting the corrupt and destructive maxims of despotism, I have considered the happiness of the people as the end of government." Would that modern governments could have a similar attitude, which many don't, which most don't. Unfortunately, after the death of Julian, the Christian church once again regained power, and 15 years later, the most Christian Emperor Theodosius ascended the throne and proceeded to destroy all that stood in the way of the Orthodox Christian Church, and exiled all Christians who refused to accept the doctrine of the Trinity as outlined in the Council of Nicaea. He refused to allow unorthodox Christians to meet and confiscated their property. One of his most famous acts was to invite 15,000 people to witness the games of the circus, only to have them all massacred. Then he turned his attention to the enemies of Christianity, as he called them. He refused to allow the pagans to worship in their own way and appropriated their temples for Christian use. The Temple of the Celestial Virgin at Carthage was converted to a Christian church, as was the Pantheon at Rome. Then he moved on to the mystery schools and had little trouble in bringing about their destruction. The only school that offered any great resistance was the school of the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was situated near Athens. But in the year 396, an attack led by Christian monks known as the Black Shirts finally brought this wonderful school to an end, and the temple was left in ruins. At least, it was brought to an apparent end. I'm sure that the teachings were preserved in secrecy and still exist today. Then Theodosius moved on to Alexandria, where he sacked the temple of Serapis and perpetrated many atrocities against the pagans. The temple was eventually reduced to a pile of rubble, and later a Christian church was built to honor the Christian martyrs who had suffered during the assault on the original temple. He also destroyed the Serapion library, which housed many priceless books. However, it is said that the important books had been gradually removed to places of safety and are stored even to this day in subterranean galleries. Perhaps when mankind is responsible enough, these books may resurface, as others have, like the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. So now one main school remained to be destroyed, and this was the Neo-Platonic. It was given to Cyril, the nephew of Theophilus, the Bishop of Alexandria, to do this noble deed. When Cyril succeeded his uncle as bishop in 412 AD, he commenced by oppressing the Novitians and the Jews. Regarding the latter, Cyril led attacks on synagogues and drove the Jews out of the city. It is strange that Cyril is now regarded as a saint, even though he was tried for stealing gold and silver church vessels. Yet he is said to have been honored for promoting Mary, the mother of Jesus, to Mary, the mother of God, and introducing Isis into the Christian church under the name of Mary and as a black virgin. Wonderful reasons for being made a saint. Now, at that time in Alexandria was a young lady known for her learning, eloquence, and great beauty, and her name was Hypatia. In fact, in Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 53, a fragment of a letter to her by Synesius, Bishop of Ptolemais, is preserved, which says, "My heart yearns for the presence of your divine spirit, which more than anything else could alleviate the bitterness of my fortunes." Would that the sainted Cyril could have looked upon her in such a fashion and had the same reverence for someone who was truly spiritual. Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a well-known philosopher and mathematician, the author of a commentary on Euclid, and his daughter is said to have helped him in the writing of this. Even as a child in her native city of Athens, she showed great interest in philosophy, and she became one of her father's most gifted pupils. She wrote commentaries on the Arithmetica of Diophantus of Alexandria, the Conics of Apollonius of Perga, and the arithmetical canon of Ptolemy. Alas, none of these commentaries have survived, at least not as far as we know. Hypatia came into contact with the Neoplatonic school while living in Athens. These schools, founded by such spiritual giants as Plotinus, Porphyry, and Iamblichus, were ideal for the intuitive and intelligent young woman, and she identified herself with them. When she moved to Alexandria, she began to give lectures. And her eloquence and beauty attracted many students and admirers. Two of her closest friends were Orestes, the prefect of Alexandria, and Synesius, the bishop of Cyrene. Hypatia, it is said, brought Egypt nearer to an understanding of its ancient mysteries than it had been for thousands of years. She demonstrated the possibility of the union of the individual self with the self of all, the divine self. And like Ammonius Saccas, she showed the similarity of all religions and their common source. None of this impressed Cyril, though, and all he knew was that she was undermining the authority of the Christian church and must be stopped. So, on a fateful day in the year 414 AD, a crowd of Cyril's monks, led by Peter the Reader, assembled in front of the museum where Hypatia had just finished giving a lecture. Her chariot drew up to the door and she appeared. She got in, but the monks surrounded her and forced her to descend. They stripped her naked and dragged her into a nearby church of God, pulling her to the altar. One can only imagine the indignity suffered by a young woman who was a quiet student of theosophy, being forced to suffer this ordeal. But she was not finished yet. She struggled free from her tormentors and rose to her full height, ready to say something to them. Perhaps she would have spoken the soft words of one whose heart was full of compassion. We will never know, because Peter the Reader clubbed her mercilessly to death, and her dead body was dragged into the streets where the flesh was scraped from the bones with oyster shells, and what remained burnt on a bonfire. Probably this was to ensure that she was not resurrected with the rest of them, as they thought. Christian charity, indeed. The death of Hypatia marked the end of the Neoplatonic school. Exoterically, the Christian church had succeeded, although esoterically, it can never do so, as the Theosophical Society and other organizations prove. Truth will always win out in the end. It is said that the last 7 remaining philosophers, Hermes, Priscianus, Diogenes, Eudalius, Damascius, Simplicius, and Isidorus, fled to the Far East to escape the persecution of the Emperor Justinian. Although these atrocities were carried out by the Christian church of the time, I'm sure that all true Christians who cherish the teachings of Jesus will be as appalled as anyone and desire only that their religion be proved to be a religion of compassion and love, as it was originally meant to be. So, Hypatia of Alexandria, although known as a mathematician, inwardly, she was more of a philosopher, or a true theosophist, as we would say. H.P. Blavatsky said that there were more theosophists outside the society than in it. It's how a person lives. So all the great spiritual teachers on different levels, from the highest to the most humble, can be regarded as theosophists if they lived the life. So although she was the first woman in history to make contributions in her fields of mathematics, she was a compiler, editor, and preserver of early mathematical works. She was the first woman to write on maths and refine equations. She was the head of the Platonist school, where she taught maths, philosophy, and scientific aspects of Neoplatonism. Her death marked the decline of Alexandria as a central of learning, as it says here. She also believed in the heliocentric system, that the Earth went around the sun, and many different things she taught. So that such an influential woman should be almost unknown in the West is due mainly to suppression by the church. It is fortunate that the theosophical movement is able to appreciate people for what they are, no matter what their outward persuasions. For the divine spirit is the birthright of every man and woman, and transcends any designations put upon it by fallible mortals, blinded by power, lust, and jealousy. So let us now honour this woman and show that she is not forgotten, and that what she did for us all will certainly sweeter make the ocean's bitter waves, that mighty sea of sorrow formed of the tears of men, as the voice of the silence by H.P. Blavatsky says. And her legacy lives on. There's a film called Agora, which stars Rachel Weisz. It's a very good film. It's about the life of Hypatia. It's fictionalized in places, but it still gives a nice account. And Rachel Weisz gives a good performance as Hypatia. And this is a picture by Julia Margaret Cameron, the famous Victorian photographer. And this is a portrait of Hypatia using a model. And here is an actress in a 1900 play playing Hypatia. Also, Charles Kingsley wrote a novel on Hypatia. So her legacy lives on. It's a shame that not more is known about her teachings. There's very little known about her life and her teachings, really. Comparatively little, because the Christian Church, of course, suppressed that, as they did with Sappho, who I may be talking about in another talk, destroying most of her poetry, which they regarded as being obscene, even though it wasn't. But what we should be thinking about is what we are as divine beings, that all these people tried to awaken us to, even though the orthodox churches of Christianity, Islam, etc., try to suppress the spirit, try to make us follow just the dead letter, and deny the spirit within us, which transcends any designations. We can talk about the Buddha nature, the Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness, etc. The true self within has no name. It's beyond all designations. Something we feel, experience, become within ourselves. When we've got beyond words, images, imaginings, for what we have become, there will never be a name. But it's something of infinite beauty that grows and grows within us until we have a mind that embraces the universe. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully, I'll see you soon. Well, definitely I'll see you soon, actually. So, Om Shanti, 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 peace, 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 peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. And thank you for listening.